Welcome my friends to this Next.js tutorial where not only will we be learning Next.js 14 and everything that comes with it, all the cool features and functionalities, but we'll also be learning how to build a statically generated blog website. Now this is an incredibly useful thing to know how to do, and Next.js allows us to do it with Markdown files, so we can write out a blog post in a local Markdown file. And in this tutorial we'll learn how we can get Next.js to statically build out a whole lot of web pages to create a really awesome recipe blog. You might also be wondering why I have my Small James website open. And that's because this is actually a statically generated blog site made with Next.js. If we come into the notes directory, here I have a whole lot of notes. These are just markdown files that I have got Next.js to turn into static web pages. I can click on one and then it all looks absolutely beautiful. So it's basically just a blog site. We're going to learn how to do it. And if you're not familiar with what a statically generated blog site is, basically if you think about a blog, it's got thousands of blog articles. Each one of those is at a sub path. So you might have blog/learn how to code or something like this. Here we can see this one's notes/html_css. And where originally someone might come to that web page and you could fetch all the data from the database and load it in, if you have a whole lot of users visiting that website, the traffic to your database is going to be insane. So it's really inefficient. Instead, we can use Next.js to statically build the page. So what this means is that it takes the blog article, it takes whatever data it has, in this case it's going to be our markdown files, and when we build our Next.js site, Next.js is going to build all of the sub pages we need for our website. So basically they're all pre-prepared. We don't have to fetch any more data. And so when a user visits that blog page, the page is already loaded. We don't have to fetch any data and it's infinitely more efficient. So this is really good if you want to cut costs on your application. It's also absolutely brilliant for search engine optimization, not to mention that your pages will also load much faster. Now in this tutorial, we're going to be building a recipe blog app. Here it's called the Bubbly Baker. We have a whole lot of recipes. These are all saved in markdown files, which we'll learn how to access later. And if we click on a recipe, we get taken to the recipe subroute, so the recipe blog subroute, and here we can access the whole recipe. We can see that the page meta information is updated. We can route back to the home page. Super fast, really quick, and very easy to make with Next.js. So overall, it's going to be an absolute winner of a tutorial. If you enjoy the video, smash the like and subscribe buttons. Love that support. And with that all said, let's get into the code. So it's now time to get our hands dirty with some programming. And the first thing we're going to do is open up a terminal or a command line. And I'm in my project directory where I have all of my projects, and this is where we're going to initialize our Next.js project. Now just before we do that, there's a few things you should know. First off, if you're not that familiar with React, the React JavaScript framework, there's a link to a tutorial in the description down below that will bring you up to speed. It does help for building Next.js applications. Furthermore, if you have any questions, you're welcome to ask them in the Discord channel. And finally, the link to the GitHub repo is also available in the description down below, and we'll need that because the application we're building today is pre-styled. So we're going to focus on learning Next.js and we don't have to worry about styling our whole application. So the CSS file for the project will be available in the GitHub, but we will get to that together very shortly. Now to actually initialize a Next.js project, the first thing we're going to do is head over to the Next.js documentation, also linked in the description down below, and here we are going to use the command npx create next app at latest. So if we come back into our terminal, we can type that in, npx create -next app at latest, and then we can name our app. So I'll call this project static recipe blog. If we hit enter, that's going to prompt us for some configuration for our project. Do we want TypeScript? Absolutely not. ESLint? Yes. Tailwind CSS, this is not going to be a Tailwind CSS project. Source directory, no, we do not want that. The app router, yes we do. And the last one, import alias, and that's going to be a no. So that will go ahead and install our Next.js project for us. And now that that is all done, I can go ahead and open up a VS Code window, Visual Studio Code window. This is where we'll be doing all of our programming. If you don't have this installed, a link to install VS Code will be in the description down below. And in here, we're going to hit open. We're going to come over to our projects directory, click on the static recipe blog and hit open. That's going to bring our project up for us. Here we can see all of the files and the folders that we will be needing for our Next.js project. So just to quickly run through our directory, here we have an app folder. This is where all the magic in our project is going to happen. We've got some special pages, notably the page.js and the layout.js. We also have a modular CSS sheet, a page.module.css. We're going to go ahead and delete that file because we do not need it. Additionally, we have a node modules file. We won't be touching that. We have a public directory where we can save any local assets. And then we just have some configuration files such as our package.json and a readme, which also happens to be written in Markdown. So isn't that handy dandy? Now, the first things we're going to do in our project is create a folder called recipes. We're also going to create a folder called utils, and we're going to create one more folder called components. Now, all of these folders are created in the top level directory, so not inside of the app. We can see they're all sitting adjacent here, and they're just going to be for organizing all of our code. If we open up our app, we can come in here and we have a pre-styled home route. We're going to go ahead and delete everything in the page.js route. So all we're left with is a basic React functional component. Here we have a function, it's called home, and it returns something where this something is known as JSX. So in here we'll have our main tags, and that's going to be this file for the minute. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to download all of the Markdown files. I'm not going to get you to write out all of the recipes. I prepared them for you, in addition to all of the styles for our project. If we come into the globals.css, we can delete everything. And what I'll want you to do is go over to the GitHub repo that's linked in the description down below. If you click on that and find the app directory, you'll find the globals.css file, and that will have all of the styles that you can just copy, or you can download the file directly and save it inside of the app directory. So here I'm going to copy everything across, and now my project is completely styled and we don't have to stress about it. Also, if you're in the GitHub repo, if you could star it, that would be amazing, super appreciated. And while you're there, the other thing you'll want to get is the 6 Markdown files you'll find within the recipes folder. I'm just once again going to go ahead and copy them across. We have 6. In here we have a Markdown formatted recipe with some metadata up the top. And as I mentioned, you can just copy them straight across from the GitHub as well. Now these recipe files are the blog posts, so you could make a whole lot of extra blog posts. You can continually add them to this recipes file. You could create different subcategories of blog posts, and essentially you just make one, you add the metadata, and you write out your blog article using the Markdown syntax. Now, if you're not familiar with the Markdown syntax, I also have a video on that linked in the description down below that you could go and check out. It's about 8 minutes or something really short. It's a very nice syntax to learn. I use it for all sorts of note-taking, and I'd recommend picking it up. It doesn't take long. So now that we've done all of our admin for our application, the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and open up a terminal within our Visual Studio Code window. Now, one way you can do this is by hitting Control-Shift-P, and the menu will come up the top, and you can hit Toggle Terminal, and that will pop it up. You should also be able to open up a terminal from the file or folder options available. Once we have this terminal up and running, we can come in here and type npm run dev, hit enter, and that's going to boot up our app on probably localhost 3000 for you. It's going to be 3002 for me. And we can come back over to a browser and we can paste that URL in. And if I move this window to the side, we can see that we have a totally blank application. Perfect, just the way we want it. Now currently this blank application is loading in our global CSS styles into the layout. We can see here we have imported the globals.css file up the top. And the first thing to note is that this app directory represents the routes and sub pages of our application. So at the top level of our app directory, we have 2 special files. We have a layout and we have a page. Now the page and layout keywords or file names are reserved in Next.js. They have special meaning where the layout is a wrapper of our page, so that's where we're going to wrap our entire page at this particular path, so the home path. And if we open this up, we can see in here we have the body, and inside here we have some children contents. Now the children is everything contained within our layout, specifically the page. So the page gets rendered within the layout. Now once again, these are both just functional components. Here we have a function called root layout. It receives the children contents, which is just whatever it contains, whatever it wraps, and that's just everything in the page. Now we're also going to create a new folder inside of the app directory, and this is going to be called recipes. And in here we're going to create another subfolder, and this is going to have square parentheses because it's going to be a dynamic path name. And we're just going to call it slug because it's a dynamic path slug. And in here we're going to right click and we're going to create a new page.js file. And this page.js file is what will be rendered when we get to the app/recipes/slug, whatever that dynamic slug is, route. And we'll see how that works in a second. In here, we're just going to create a default functional component, and I'm going to call this recipe page. And we're just going to return a div that says hello world. Now, just to really clarify the way that this works, here we have the app directory. And if I come into the page.js and type some ASDs, refresh the page, we see that's what shows up on our home page. Now, instead, if I come over and I type /recipes/banana muffin, we can see that hello world gets rendered on the page. So that is matching the pathing that we're doing inside of the app directory. And the page is what's being rendered within that directory, within the layout. Now the layout wraps our entire application. It's just the pages that we add at these specific directories. You can technically have nested layouts, but I wouldn't worry about that at the minute. Now, one quick thing I'm going to do is just rename this file here. Instead of recipes, I'm just going to call it recipe because it will be a singular recipe that we render. And we can see that now broke our little page right here until I once again match the paths up. So that's pretty cool. We've set up the pages for our application. The next thing we're going to do is install some dependencies for our project. Namely, we're going to have npm install inside of our terminal. The first one's going to be gray-matter. And then we're going to have a space and we're going to install another one called Markdown-2-JSX. And essentially, gray matter is going to be used to read the contents of our Markdown file. And then the Markdown.jsx is going to take the Markdown content that's been read onto our page and convert it into JSX, which is essentially what React and Next.js render onto the page. So that's pretty straightforward. And with that installed, we can go ahead and boot up our application again by typing npm run dev. Now the first component we're going to be working on is the layout.js. It wraps our application, as I said before, where the children content that gets wrapped within these curly parentheses is basically JavaScript that we can render inside of this HTML section. And that's just going to display everything that gets wrapped by this component. Inside of here, inside of the function, I'm going to create a variable called header, and that's going to have some circular parentheses. And inside here, I'm going to have the header tags, opening and closing tags. And then I'm going to do the exact same for footer. So let footer equal to, and then I'm going to have some footer tags as well. Now, if we enter this onto a new line, have the children in the middle, currently the children is going to be these main tags because our layout wraps the page returns the main, so the main is what becomes the children. Above the children contents, I can now use these circular parentheses to render out my header, which is just what we created above, and beneath I'm going to render out my footer. Now if I come in here and type all sorts of random stuff like so, and if we come back to the home route, we can see that that information does in fact show up. It's a shame I used the similar keywords for all of them because it obviously looks very similar. But we now have our header at the top of the page, the main content in the middle, and the footer down the bottom. We can do the footer first. That's pretty straightforward. It's just going to be a paragraph tag that says made with, and then we're going to use a little heart emoji just because that's cute. I might actually go for a yellow heart. It's a bit less intimate. Where is it? Right there. So it's pretty fun. That shows up down the bottom, nice and easy. Perfect. Made with love. The next one we're going to do is the header. Now the header is going to be an h1 tag, except we're going to wrap it inside a link tag where the link is a Next.js specific tag. So it has a capital letter. If we hit enter on the IntelliSense, that's going to import the link component up the top of our page. Now if we create the opening and closing tags, we're going to want to wrap our h1. That's going to say the bubbly baker. That's the name of our recipe app. And we can see our application's not happy, and that's because a link, which works in the same way as an anchor tag does, needs an href, and this is just going to be a slash. Now the reason we're doing this is because our header wraps our entire component, our entire web page. And since it's inside of this layout, it also wraps any subdirectory pages. So when I consequently come over to /recipe/ whatever the name of the recipe is, we can see the header and the footer are still here. So they wrap our entire application even if the contents within the pages changes. And the benefit of doing it like this is now we created a link where the link just has an href that's a /. That's the home route. This is available on any page. And so now if I click it, currently we're on the recipe/ASD route. If I hit that, it takes us back to the home page. So that's just really easy, super simple, a nice way of adding intuitive navigation to our web page. So now that we have our header and our footer done, the next thing we're going to do is start getting busy with the actual recipe cards on the home page. And for this, there's a few things we're going to do. The first thing is creating a component, and this is going to be called recipe, well actually I'm going to call it postcard.js. In here, we're going to export a default function called postcard, where the post and card are going to be capitalized. And in here, we're going to return some JSX. This is going to be another Next.js link. So we're going to have to import that up the top of our component. And in here, we can just for the minute provide it an empty href. So it's just an empty string so that it is happy. Now we'll fill that out more in a second, but the next thing we have to do is actually get all the posts, read them from our local files inside of this recipes folder. And we're going to do that by creating a function inside of utils called getPostMetadata.javascript.js. Now inside of this, it's not a functional component. We didn't give it a capitalized name, so it's just a regular JavaScript file. We need to import a few things, namely the file system module. So we're going to say import fs from fs. And we'll also need to import matter from gray matter, which is how we're going to read all of our local files. After that, we're going to define a function called getPostMetadata, and that's going to take a base path. And in here, what we're going to do once we've opened up that function is we're going to say const, and we're going to define the folder where we look for these posts, and that's going to be equal to the base path that we pass in, plus a /. After that, we're going to access all of the files, so we're going to say const files, and that's going to be equal to filesystem.readDirectSync synchronously, and we're going to pass in the folder. And then after that, we're going to read only the Markdown files. So we're going to say const Markdown posts is equal to files.filter, and we're going to use the array filter method, and this is going to take a file, and we're going to use an arrow function, and we're only going to include a file that ends with the .markdown extension, file extension. So now that we have access to all of the posts, we can get the file data using the gray matter library. So I'm going to say const posts is equal to all of the Markdown posts, and I'm going to use the map method, where the map method takes an arrow function as an argument. And in here, we're going to get the file name, so that's the name of the file. And now we're going to say const file contents is equal to filesystem.read file synchronously. Then we're inside of this, we're going to call it as an argument and pass in a template literal string. And that's going to be the base path / the file name. Now the base path and the file name are both wrapped in the $ curly parentheses, because that's how we pass in some JavaScript to our template literal. And then we're going to pass in the file encoding, which is just going to be UTF-8, just like that, very easy. Once we have all the file contents, now we can say const matter result is equal to, and we can call matter. Now we imported matter from the gray matter library, and we can just pass in the file contents. And once we have that, we can return an object. This is what gets passed into our actual component. And we just want to access all of the meta information about our recipes. So if we come in here, we can see the meta information is available between these triple dashes. So we have a title, a prep time, a cook time, and a description. So we're going to get access to all of them. We're going to say title is the key, and the value associated with that is matter result.data.title. Make sure we spell that correctly. After that, we're going to have the prep time, and that's going to be matter result.data.prep time. Then we'll have the cook time. That's going to be matter result.data.cook time. The next one is bio, and that's going to be matter result.data.description. And then finally, we're going to have the slug. We're going to return the slug, which is just going to be the file name.replace, and we're going to replace the .md with an empty string just so it looks a bit pretty. Now up the top here, we're going to export this function as the main export from this file. So we're just going to add the export default in front of the function definition like so. And the one last thing I forgot to do is after posts, we just have to come down and return posts from the function. So now that we've done that, we can come back into our page right here, this page.js, where we have our home functional component, and we can get access to all of our posts. So we can say const post metadata is equal to get post metadata. We can see that import showing up right here. So if I hit enter on that IntelliSense, it's going to create the necessary import for us. And now I can call that as a function and pass in the directory where I should be looking for these Markdown posts. So if I save that, and now if I come in here and say console.log post metadata, we can see that on the server side, we've accessed all of the post metadata that we can now display on our screen. So that's super convenient. It's a nice list. So what I can do in here is I can create a div that has a class name of post container, where post container is a style that's already created inside of the global CSS. And in here, I can use the circular parentheses, and I can map out some post cards. So that's going to be cool, or recipe cards. So I can say post metadata.map, and I can call this one the post. I can get the post index as the second argument, and that is our arrow function. And from the arrow function, I can return, and in here, I can just return the post card, or the blog card, or the recipe card, whatever you should call it. And whenever we use a map, whatever we return, the top level needs to have a unique key, which is why we got the post index in as an argument in our arrow function. Now I'm also going to add the recipe, or the post, as a prop to the postcard component so that we can access it within the postcard, and I'm now going to remove that console log. So currently not much shows up, but that's because our postcard is pretty empty. We've passed in some props, so we need to receive some props. And in here, what I'm going to do is create this component. So first up, we're going to say const post is equal to props. So we're going to destructure post out of props, which is going to be the object that contains our metadata for that particular recipe card. Inside of the link, we're going to create a div. This is going to have an h3 in it. Now the link itself is going to have a class name of unstyled, so we can get rid of any weird link styling. The parent or container div is going to be called post card, where the card has a capital C. Inside of here, we're going to have the h3. Then we can have the curly parentheses to render out some JavaScript. This is going to contain the post title. Underneath that, we're going to have a paragraph tag. That's going to have the post bio. Beneath that, we're going to have a div with the class name of stats container. And in here, we're going to have another div, and this is going to have an h5 that says prep time, like so. Beneath that, we have a paragraph that's post.prep_time. And then what I'm going to do is copy and paste this element just underneath and change this to say cook time. Likewise, just here, I'll replace that to say cook. So if we go ahead and save that, just like that, we have created this card that shows up. And if I click on it, currently nothing is going to happen because it's just routing us to the home page. But in a second, we're going to provide an href, and that's going to actually route us to the necessary page. Now this is pretty cool. It's nice and responsive, looks sufficient. And once this project is complete, I challenge you to go out and restyle it if you really want to practice your skills and become a better Next.js developer. Adding your own flair and adapting the code in a tutorial is a great way to learn and gain confidence programming by yourself. If you do that, I'd love to see what you guys come up with, so you can always share that with me in the Discord channel. Now the other thing we have to do is come back and handle this href right here. That's pretty straightforward. That's just going to route us to, we're going to use a template literal string, and that's going to be /recipe/ curly parentheses, and that's going to be post.slug. So now if I click on this card, that takes us to this subsequent route. Then if I click on the bubbly baker, I get routed back. So that's pretty nifty. Now we haven't really incorporated any special Next.js features just yet, but we have got the routing all working. And so with that all done, we can come over to our page.js. Now inside of here, a fair bit of magic is going to happen so that everything is statically generated. The first thing we're going to have to do is import a bunch of stuff. So we're going to import Markdown from Markdown to JSX. We're going to import get post metadata from our utils. We're going to import React from React. We'll also need to import the file system from file system. And finally, we'll import matter from gray matter. Now, the next thing on our list to do is create a function called get post content. And this is just going to be a utility function that takes a slug and it fetches the content from the Markdown post that matches the slug. So that's why we pass in a slug, and now what we can do is we can say const folder, set that equal to recipes, then a /. Now we can target the file. The file is going to be at the route of the folder plus the backticks. We can have the slug right here in a template literal string, and we can add on the Markdown extension. And now what we can do is access the content. So that's going to be equal to filesystem.read file synchronously. We can access the file and pass in the encoding, which is UTF-8. And now that we have the contents, we can say const the matter result, pass the file, say that's equal to matter, and just pass in the content. Finally, we can return the matter result, which is just all of our Markdown content, almost as raw text. So that's pretty cool. That's going to get the content from the post. Now the next two functions we're going to define are going to make this page statically generated. We're going to get all of the information we need at build time so that we can build these static pages. And we'll have a second function that's going to ensure we have all the necessary meta information for the page as well, so that we have good search engine optimization and all that good stuff. So the first function we're going to define is going to be called export const generate static params, and that's going to be equal to an asynchronous function. Note that I'm using the arrow syntax here. And in here, we're going to say const post is equal to get post metadata. We're going to pass in the recipes directory as an argument. We imported that function from above. And now what we're going to do is we're going to return posts.map post. This takes an arrow function that receives the post, and then we're going to return the circular parentheses with an object. So the object is what's getting returned, and that's going to have a slug that's called post.slug. And essentially what's going to happen is when we build the pages, it's going to get all of the posts, and then it's going to create a URL or a page for every post slug that it finds. So essentially we'll end up with static pages for all of these directories right here, and these are going to be the relevant slugs. So that's pretty cool. We can have it generate a whole lot of static pages for us. The next thing we're going to do is define an asynchronous function, and this is going to be called generate metadata. Now this is back to our good old syntax from before, and this is going to allow us to get the metadata for the page. In here we're going to receive the params and the search params. Now notice I've wrapped them inside of the curly parentheses, which means that they're getting destructured from whatever argument is passed into the function. Inside of this regular function, we're going to get the ID. So the ID is going to be equal to the page parameters. Then we're going to use the optional chaining syntax to check for a slug. If the slug does exist, then we're going to return something, otherwise we're going to return something else. So in the case where the slug does exist, just like up here, we're going to return the multiplication dot. I like using that. And then we're going to add onto that the params and the slug. The ternary operator just here is a conditional check. So this check basically says, all right, we want to define the ID. We're going to check if the slug exists. If it does, we're going to assign this section right here to the ID. Otherwise, we're just going to assign an empty string. After that, we're going to return, and the title of the page is going to be a template literal string. And this is going to be the bubbly baker. Remember, the title is the metadata title, so that's what comes up here. And then we're going to have a space, and in here we're just going to use the template literal syntax, and we're going to throw in the ID, and we're also going to replace every instance of an underscore with a space so that we don't get any weird underscores from these file names right here. So that's going to generate all of the metadata for the static pages that we want to build. All of the static pages, we basically have a static page, or we return a static page for every Markdown recipe in our recipes folder. Now we can actually define the contents that's going to go inside of these statically generated pages, the pages that get built in build time and are saved, cached, so that they're built once, they can be used a whole lot, and we only have to get the data once. So the first thing we're going to do is receive some props inside of our recipe page, and from the props we can get the slug, which is the name of this particular page. So the slug is equal to the props dot the parameters of the page dot slug. So once we have the slug, that's basically this fella right here, slug whatever it is, that end URL, that end path that we're at. Once we have that, we can say const post, and that's equal to get post content, which is this function we defined up the top right here. That takes the slug, and that's going to get the content that's literally inside of that post. So we can just pass in the slug, and now we should be able to console.log the post and see all that information pop up. So if I inspect our page and come in here and we click on that link, nothing's happening, and that's because it's a server-side page. So down here we can see we have all of the contents. So the console is on the server side inside of our terminal. So that's pretty cool. We have all of this content right here that we can now go ahead and access. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, we're going to swap these divs out for mains. Because this is the file that gets wrapped by our header and footer, we essentially have to match the main syntax. So it's the main body of our document. On this page, this is also going to be the main body of our document. Inside here, we're going to have an article tag because it's semantically an article. And inside of here, we're going to render out the Markdown, which we imported above from the Markdown to .jsx. And inside of the Markdown tags, we're going to render out the post.content. If you remember when we looked in here, the post.content is all this wacky stuff right here. There's all of the content, so we're just going to render that out on the page. So if we go ahead and save that, now we can see our Markdown post gets rendered on the page. We can also see that the metadata for our page is updated. So here we have the bubblybaker.applepie. That's the subdirectory. This is the apple pie. If we go back home, we get create next app. So we'll fix that in a second. We'll learn how to add metadata to a home route. But then if I click on the banana bread, the Bubbly Baker banana bread route updates. So our title, our page metadata is all sorted. These pages are statically generated, so they're built at build time, they're saved, and then the data is read. We don't have to refetch the data every time a new user loads the page. So it's incredibly efficient, super fast, and good for the bank, depending on your hosting configuration. If we click on the Bubbly Baker, it routes us back home, so that's pretty cool. Everything is nice and responsive, and suddenly you can see how you could make a massive blog site just from this very simple syntax, throw in some extra styling, add a few more blog posts, and you know, Bob's your uncle. Now the one last thing we're going to do before we're done is come back to our layout up here, and we're just going to change this page metadata to the Bubbly Baker as well, so everything matches. And the description for this page is going to be my amazing recipe app. Pretty straightforward. And so now the title is updated to match. We have the Bubbly Baker. I can click on one, we go to the banana bread. I can come back home and we have all of our recipes. And just like that, we've learned how to make a static blog site with Next.js. We've learned how to statically generate the pages. Everything is server-side rendered, so it's incredibly good for search engine optimization. It's super fast as well. We've also learned about how to make Next.js components. We learned about the reserved page and layout files. We learned how to create components, map out different components, fetch all of the posts, render out the meta information, pass through all the markdown, and show it on the screen. As I mentioned at the start of the video, my website is literally the exact same foundational skeleton. So you can make all sorts of wicked stuff just from this code we have put together in this tutorial. As always, I highly recommend you go and make some personalizations to this project, change some of the articles, make your own blog site, make it look different, fiddle with the styles. You could even get rid of the global CSS and add Tailwind and style out your application that way. That's what my website is, that's Tailwind instead. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, smash the like and subscribe buttons. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've learned a lot, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace. Learning to code? If so, be sure to check out the Learn to Code roadmap or dive straight in with these videos. That's a good one.